you could get into a space which is, oh, everything's so scary in the hospitals right now. I don't want to approach this family and offer them donation for their loved one who just passed because they can't even be by their loved one's side. Remember, there was a time period where people were dying in hospitals and their loved ones weren't allowed into the hospital, whether they were COVID related or not. So there could have been a mentality to say, you know what, let's let them deal with their grief. We will not bring up organ donation. But we know the power of organ donation. And we know that organ donation doesn't just heal the recipient. We know that if their son was able to donate organs and save someone else's life, that would help. But it was hard because conversations that they're used to having in person, they are now having over the phone. And we both know that that's just not the same thing. You can't extend a hand. You can't give a hug. You can't watch body language. You can't get any, facial cues. So it is a more challenging ask.
Hello and welcome to Year of the Pivot on the Beyond Networking podcast. This season, we're learning from individuals and organizations who made monumental shifts in 2020 in order to keep their business alive and continue their mission. I'm your host, Brian Miller, and author, speaker, and consultant on human connection. Today's guest is Elisse Glennon. Elisse is the founder and executive director of the New Jersey Sharing Network Foundation. The New Jersey Sharing Network is a nonprofit organization for the recovery and placement of donated organs and tissues. It's important work. The foundation, where Elisse presides, is dedicated to increasing the numbers of lives saved through research, family support, public awareness, and education. Now, there are 4,000 people on the New Jersey list alone awaiting a transplant. So when COVID threatened the entire national healthcare system, Elisse and her team of 180 committed professionals, plus volunteers, had to navigate incredibly shaky seas. The big question was, would donations plummet? Which would devastate the chances of everyone on that list who desperately needed a transplant. Not on Elisse's watch. Instead, the New Jersey Sharing Network had a record year. And in this conversation, Elisse teaches us precisely how they did it. Now, you might be tired of hearing about mindset shifts in the self-help community, but Elisse and her team are proof that it is often the mindset, not the tactics or techniques, that carry the day. In particular, pay close attention to how she describes the process of asking grieving families for an organ or tissue donation, and the shift from viewing that conversation as a burden to recognizing it as a gift. Check the show notes for all the ways to connect with Elisse and the New Jersey Sharing Network. Head to yearofthepivot.com for the Pivot Power newsletter, get notified when a new episode drops, the Pivot Pearl of the Week, and gain access to exclusive live streams, masterminds, and clubhouse get-togethers. And now I bring you Elisse Glennon. This episode was made possible by Riverside.fm. Capture full, high-quality, raw audio and up to 4K video natively and without any internet interruptions. That's right, even if the internet blips out during the live call, your recording remains pristine. Head to Riverside.fm for your free trial and a big thank you for sponsoring Year of the Pivot. Elisse, let's just get started because we're already having a nice conversation, and then there's that awkward, how do we just start the interview cold moment. Thank you so much for taking the time. I can't imagine how busy and how chaotic your life must be, both personally and professionally. So thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thrilled to be here with you, Brian.
So why don't we start here, just this week, right now, this weekend, what are you working on right now? What's on your plate, this moment?
Well, we just finished a couple of things. We at the Sharing Network just completed a year, as everybody has, a year here where we're responsible for organ recovery for transplant. And we are just now wrapping up kind of all of our year-end numbers, see how we fared during what was obviously and what continues to be a crazy time during the pandemic, and how that has impacted organ and tissue donation. So right now what we're doing is we're looking at all of those numbers, and we did end up breaking records in 2020. Incredibly, people were very generous with organ donation, and more people gave than ever before. So we're right now looking at kind of pushing that messaging out from the organ donation side. Simultaneously, we have a foundation, and that is what I'm the executive director of. And so we're looking at how our philanthropic efforts fared in 2020, and how we need to, the name of your project, the Pivot Project, how we really need to pivot in 2021, because from a philanthropic standpoint, the landscape has dramatically changed in how we have to do our work. So right now we're really looking at what worked and didn't work in 2020 with the new world we're living in, and how we can plan to kind of get back on track for 2021 in the future.
Wow, so congratulations on the organ donations being up. I mean, is that something anybody expected? Did you expect that a year ago, March, April, when this all started?
Absolutely not. In fact, about last May, even our transplant centers had to temporarily shut down because of the increase in COVID patients and patients on ventilators in the overrun hospitals. They did have to shut down transplants for a short period of time. Combine that with the fact that any COVID-19 patient who passed away was an automatic rule out for organ donation. We never could have expected that with those two factors that we would still end the year with more organ donors than ever before. So that's really a tribute to a couple of things. It's a tribute to the donors themselves and their families who made that courageous decision at the time of their passing. It's a tribute to our highly trained and effective and compassionate and dedicated team members who work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and straight through COVID. So they did not give up during that time. And a tribute to the partnership we have with our hospitals and transplant programs. So it's kind of everybody working together to ensure that despite those issues in 2020, that we would still focus and get folks transplanted. So to answer your question directly, no, we would not have expected that last year at this time.
I mean, that's just unbelievable, and I want to dive more into that as we go on. Let's then back up to March of 2020. This is now January 2021 when we're having this conversation. So we're starting to actually creep up on a year of pandemic, which is kind of wild. I had that moment the other day where a year ago next week, in just about a week, is when I got my first cancellation from COVID. I actually got a cancellation from COVID for an event I was supposed to be speaking at in January of 2020, which was, once everything happened, months later when we actually all found out about it for real. I remember hearing politicians and that didn't seem like they knew this was coming, going, well, I knew this was coming in January because I had a canceled event. So how did other people not know this was coming? So in March, I think for me, it was like March 13th, March 14th was like the day the world ended, crashed, seemed like it was going to end forever. What immediately happened for you at the Sharing Network? And you know what? I just realized, give us your actual, in your own words, your role, what the Sharing Network does, because anybody listening, watching this will have heard my 2-sentence intro already, but give us the PR pitch.
Sure. Well, we at the Sharing Network, we are responsible for saving lives through organ and tissue donation. So we are open all of the time, like I said before, 24/7. Hospitals call us when someone passes away in their hospital, and our staff assess the patient's viability for transplant. Our staff talk with families about the opportunity for organ donation and saving someone else's life. And then our nurses, our donation coordinators, our surgical technicians follow the patient all the way through the donation, work with our transplant centers to ensure a good match for that organ, And then we continue to work with the families beyond the donation, offering family services, programs to remember their loved ones all year through. So we continue to work with the donors' families, and it's really an extension of our mission to keep their legacy alive.
Oh, that's awesome. And you are the executive director, is that right?
I'm the executive director of our foundation. So we do also have a philanthropic arm that raises money and works with community organizations, and I'm the executive director of that arm of our organization.
Right. And just briefly, how did you come to that?
About 11 years ago, almost 11 years ago, I came here to start our foundation. This organization previously hadn't had a foundation, hadn't reached.
Oh, wow. Oh, you founded it.
I founded our foundation. Yes.
Wow, my goodness.
Yes. The Sharing Network has been handling organ procurement since the 80s. There is a fee for service, and there's a fee between the transplant programs and in fact between health insurance companies and things like that when someone needs a transplant. But our CEO, his name is Joe Roth. He's been here over 20 years. And when he came here 20 years ago, he said, we really need a foundation. We need a philanthropic arm that could raise money to pay for programs, to further educate the public, to further transplant in ways beyond just paying for the actual transplant. So it was really his vision, and I came on board 11 years ago to get that started.
Wow, that's awesome, and it's so rare too these days to hear somebody who's been in the same role essentially for that long, for a decade or more, let alone for like a year anymore. I wonder if kind of the new generation coming up, kind of Gen Z that's coming into the workplace now, if they'll ever have careers like that where they stick around a place for a long time. It feels like it's almost a bygone era. So kudos to you for sticking it out and being able to then go deeper with one place and make the work better and better and better and better.
Right. Well, it's an interesting note about our employees here. We have about 180 employees, and I don't know the exact average tenure, but it is long. It's really an honor and a privilege to do this work that we do. Very few people have the opportunity to do it. In New Jersey, we're the only organ procurement organization. So you have 180 jobs here in New Jersey to do this work. So it really is an honor to work here, especially with the donors' families and the transplant recipients. So you'll see people of all ages here have, they end up sticking around, but it is very unique. Yeah. I'm glad you noted that.
So, okay, so now we're back up to March of 2020. So you're watching the news, things start to crumble, the first lockdowns go in place, and you're in Jersey, I'm in Connecticut, which means we were both kind of in the outskirts of the hot spot here on the East Coast when it all hit, and so what happened first for you personally, but as specifically as related to the foundation and the work that you do? What was the first thing that happened that you had to deal with? What was going through your head?
Well, it was March 10th when our senior leadership was on a phone call saying that on March 12th is our monthly all-staff meeting where we get all 180 people in the building. And we were talking about maybe we shouldn't do that this Thursday. And some of us, myself included, were like, why not? But, and so luckily, smarter heads prevailed, and we canceled our staff meeting that week. I remember that on March 11th, we were having an advisory board meeting of our transplant surgeons, and we said, well, we could use that thing called Zoom. It was the first time I ever heard the word Zoom. The first time. So we said, we'll try to use that thing called Zoom. So we didn't have them come here, but the senior leadership, we still were here in the building, but we sat apart from one another in the room, and we had the advisory board meeting via Zoom. Wow. Personally, that Saturday, my husband and I said, let's take a walk up to the main avenue in Caldwell, where we live, see what's happening there. And we saw the local pub trying to have a little St. Patrick's Day gathering, which was interesting. Very few people there. And then the next week, we started to talk about our upcoming events. We hold a 5K celebration of life annually that attracts 12,000 people. We hold two of them, one in May that attracts about 5,000 and one in June that attracts about 12,000. So we right away started to say, what are we going to do about that? We knew that the work of organ procurement and transplant would continue. We knew that we are part of the healthcare fabric of this country, and that would continue. But what are we going to do about these events that attract thousands and thousands of people? I would say probably beginning of April, we made the decision to cancel the May event and postpone the the June event to September, which obviously we did not hold. But
Right.
at the time, we thought it was going to be just a couple of months. So we really got into kind of that mode. We also, through our foundation and through the Sharing Network, we hold dozens of events every week in person. We have hundreds of volunteers, so we had to quickly change how we communicated with them, how we promoted our message to the general public, like I said, which was largely through programming and events. So we became Zoom experts instantly.
Yeah. Okay. So it was interesting what you said though, that you weren't worried about you weren't concerned about the work of organ donation continuing because you're in the hospitals and that's work that has to continue. It was I don't want to say the fringe, but it's the whole culture surrounding the actual organ donation itself that you were worried about falling apart, right? Like all the in person, all the support, I don't know, the excitement, the groundswell, the energy. Is that what you were worried about losing?
Community building, all of that. One of our board members called it the magic of what we do, coming together.
Yeah.
But I don't want to say we weren't worried about the other. I mean, we were very worried, getting everybody their protective equipment, making sure the staff stayed safe. For example, we put in place that only the clinical teams were allowed in our facility so that we could reduce the number of people that were coming into the building to keep them as safe as possible. We instituted new cleaning protocol, all of those things. So it wasn't that we weren't worried about it. I just want to make sure I'm saying the right words. We were very worried about it, and we had whole teams in place to address COVID and safety, and making sure our staff was safe, both in our facility, because we do also have a 24-hour lab here and a 24-hour call center. Those areas had to be staffed, and then keeping our staff safe inside the hospital. So there was that whole component to keep that moving and making sure people don't get sick.
Yeah. So, 180 people you said earlier, right, about on working throughout. I mean, how many of them did you actually roughly have to or choose to keep on site versus how many had to start doing remote work?
Let's see. I would say maybe 40 or so people would stay on site here. And then the folks that would go to the hospitals, they have to stop here to get supplies, but they'll be in and out. Sure. It was a small group.
That's a big difference between a kind of the hustle bustle and energy of having 180 people around versus having 30 or 40 people in the same space and not being able to really hang out, in break rooms and stuff like that, right? I mean, did you witness a culture change? Did you have to make active moves to make sure the people who weren't in the building anymore still felt like part of that community? Like you mentioned earlier, this badge of honor. What did you have to do with that? I mean, was that on your mind?
Absolutely. We ensured, first of all, that everyone on our team was equipped at home with the equipment that they needed. So everybody, if you needed your printer, if you needed your scanner, whatever you needed to be comfortable at home, especially once we realized this wasn't going to be just a 2-week at-home order, when we realized this was going to go on. And then we started new programming through Zoom, made sure everybody had access to that, various team building things via Zoom. We've always communicated electronically because of the nature of our work and the clinical teams that are out on the road, and not everybody's always here all the time anyway. But really trying to stay engaged also not only with our staff members, but also with the extended team, which is our volunteers, our hundreds of volunteers who also were used to coming to our building regularly for various programming, and seeing people and feeling the love and the care, of the Sharing Network.
Keeping volunteers engaged in a normal world is a monumental task. I mean, for most organizations. I mean, so I'm really curious about that. You talked about team building, which is one of those one of those necessary evil terms that we all have to use. I have to use that in the descriptions of my programs too and stuff. I don't even know what team building really is anymore. So, I mean, what kind of team building or events virtually, just out of curiosity, did you find really did help your team? Were you focused on making sure that they were reminded of the shared mission? Were you focused on let's take time away from the work to remember that we're all human? I mean, what worked for you?
We did a little bit of both. We did
Yeah.
things like, one morning we did come to the Zoom with a coffee cup that you're going to like talk about, what's on the coffee cup, all the way
Yeah.
to having guest speakers on our Zoom
Yeah.
staff meetings, which we always did in person, but
Mm,
now having them come on the Zoom and share their story of donation
mm.
or transplant with our team. So continuing to
That's
do
great.
that. So it's a little bit of both. We have
Yeah.
such a powerful mission that it's people know why they're here. It's one of these kinds of missions that we don't have to really hammer home. You meet one heart transplant recipient, or you meet one living kidney donor, or you meet the family of someone who died and donated their organs. The stories are incredibly inspirational, and they
Mm.
kind of live on in your mind and your daily.
That's great. So, okay, so you things started to fall apart. You had to figure out how to shift remote for a good portion of the staff. You figured out how to get them, what they needed, printers and all that stuff. You made sure the people were taken care of and safe in house. But then the mission itself, organ donation, you've still got this, like we started this conversation with how are we going to continue to get organ donations? Is it going to be down massively? What's the long-ranging impact? I'm sure you were thinking about if we have this year where we're down 90% or something crazy. Because I mean, I don't know, like a lot of people I talk to, like instantly, like 90% of their business was gone, 100% of their business was gone, in many industries overnight, right, in March. So how did you get from there to we're talking now in January and you were up. You had your best year and it's unbelievable. How did you get here?
Um, it was a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication from the staff, a lot of planning, regular conversations with the senior leadership team, the clinical directors are on daily huddles to make sure they had the right staffing, enough staffing to go out into the hospitals. It was kind of all hands on deck all the time, looking at the numbers, assessing patients, trying to stay on top of really staying on top of COVID, how our hospitals were doing, how the general population was doing, doing all of those things. And from a general brand or widespread notion of what is organ donation, kind of keeping that going. We were very lucky last year that the chairman of our 5K Celebration of Life happens to work for a company who does worldwide online conferences. So he right away came to us and said we could still do our 5K virtually and we could use this platform, and I will donate my time and my staff's time to run a virtual program for you, for us, for the sharing network. So we did that. In May, we ran an hour-long program with just he and I in a studio, and we had our teams and our transplant recipients and donor families send in their stories. We ran an hour-long program that turns out was viewed internationally because they used a very robust system where we can track who was watching from where. And we
Mhm.
had over 1,000 people tuning into this program from all over the world, which was something different that we have never had to get before.
Isn't that interesting that COVID ended up in so many industries, kind of, to borrow a phrase from my mentor, Seth Godin, from turning, it kind of turned the world into the neighborhood where all of a sudden your mission, where you used to be able to reach deeply reach, but reach New Jersey, essentially, like your network, all of a sudden, somebody in some other country halfway across the world you would have never had contact with before can get on board with your mission now. That you could have done that 2 years ago, but you never would have thought to or had a reason
Exactly.
to try. And it just goes
hmm
now.
Yes, absolutely. And we said, well, now even when we're back in person, we're going to have this virtual component because,
Yeah.
folks were interested,
Yeah.
right? 18 different
So,
countries tuned in. So
so you do now have plans that even if somebody waved their magic wand and said, COVID's gone, the world is safe, it's all good, you would continue having a virtual component to your work from now on.
most likely, yes. That's the kind
Yeah.
of what we're in the process of thinking about right now. I mean, right now, we're really trying to just focus 1 year at a time. Normally, we try to do longer term
Yeah.
planning, but still where we are, it's hard to know. So right now, we have moved our typical June date to September. So we thought we'll give ourselves a little more time. We do hope that we can gather in person in some capacity by September, in a safe way. But we are only
Yeah.
going to hold one event. Normally we hold two, but we're just going to
Sure.
hold one. And as of right now, we will likely have a virtual component to that, knowing that some
Yeah.
people may or may not still feel comfortable to come out, and knowing that there's people around the world who want to tune in and see their loved ones and their family members. So we will
Amazing.
do that. So that's where we're going with now. As of right now, we do have dates for 2022 to go back to the spring and go back to our two dates. And that's
Yeah.
that's our goal. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, so I just, before I do kind of the couple of questions that I ask everybody at the end here, I want to double back and kind of double down on, in a COVID world with everybody being nervous about everything, and what kinds of things will your staff working on in those conversations? Was it trust building? What I'm trying to get at is, I know your staff worked really hard and you guys had your mission, but like, to specifically, like, what were they doing in those conversations with the donors at the hospitals? What was the goal in that of those kind of conversations? What kind of maybe training were you doing with them, or retraining for a COVID world that was able to turn out so many more donations than you could have ever expected or hoped for?
Well, I think the main thing is to not give up on it, not think that, you could get into a space which is, oh, everything's so scary in the hospitals right now, I don't want to approach this family and offer them donation for their loved one who just passed, because they can't even be by their loved one's side. Remember, there was a time period where people were dying in hospitals, and their loved ones weren't allowed into the hospital, whether they were COVID related or not. So there could have been a mentality to say, you know what, let's let them deal with their grief. We will not bring up organ donation. But we know the power of organ donation, and we know that organ donation doesn't just heal the recipient, because remember, we're working on behalf of there's 4,000 patients currently waiting for a transplant in New Jersey. So we know that there's still those patients waiting for a transplant. And we also know that while someone may have just lost their son, we know that if their son was able to donate organs and save someone else's life, that would help the healing of the parents, to know that their son is living on in someone else. So it's really kind of a mindset to know and really believe in our mission and believe in organ donation. And our staff is there, but working together every day. Our clinical directors who are on call and speak regularly all day with our nurses and our donation coordinators who are in the hospital, to continue to remind them why they're doing this, remind them that it's helpful for the families, and we want to be able to offer donation. It's more of that kind of mindset to just keep going and not let anything stop us. But it was hard, because conversations that they're used to having in person, they are now having over the phone. And we both know that that's just not the same thing. You can't extend a hand. You can't give a hug. You can't watch body language. You can't get any, facial cues. So it is a more challenging ask so to speak.
Yeah.
But they worked on that and they trained. And, I'm speaking on behalf of our clinical director here.
Sure.
I wasn't in these particular conversations, but,
Yeah.
I certainly know the staff and know how dedicated they are.
It sounds like it really was a top level mindset shift from this conversation I want to have as a burden to this conversation I'm going to have as a gift.
Yes, you hit it.
Right?
That's exactly it. That is exactly it.
Yeah. I had a moment there where you were talking about, well, there was a time in COVID when, people, whether they were COVID or not, couldn't even go to the hospital. Yeah, my grandmother passed 2 weeks into lockdowns in March. She had just gotten sick in January out of nowhere. She was in completely perfect health. I thought she was going to outlive me. I mean, this woman was in perfect health, walking 8 miles a day every morning, 7 days a week at 85 years old, and then had a brain tumor that just out of nowhere, and within 2 months, that was it. I mean, went from totally fine, nothing's wrong, to gone. But she passed 2 weeks into lockdowns when nobody was allowed. So my grandfather, he wasn't allowed to go to the hospital with her, so he wasn't there when she passed. We never had a funeral. We never saw her. I didn't get to hop on a plane when we knew it was coming. And yeah, there were no conversations and we didn't have anybody reaching out. It was just such chaos. So to have somebody from an organization like yours, be able to say, in spite of all this, here's this thing that can still be meaningful and leave a legacy and do more. And that is a gift. That's amazing.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear about your grandmother, and particularly that she passed during COVID and you had to experience it in that way. Another, you just made me think of something. Another issue that we're experiencing right now is the donor family. So they lose someone, they say yes to organ donation. In a pre-COVID world, that family would then be invited to our facility to see our memorial garden. That family would then be invited to a remembrance event. That family would meet transplant recipients who, even if it wasn't their transplant recipients, would be hugging them and thanking them. And we cannot offer that right now to donor families. So they're not here. Their loved ones' names are etched on our walls. We install these names every 3 months and we invite families to come in. And we are not allowing any guests in our building, in our facility right now. So there's a whole component of what we call aftercare, donor family aftercare, that we are unable to do in the manner that we've done it in the past, because caring for someone over Zoom is very, very different. So we are really looking forward to the day when we can kind of open up again and bring everybody together. Even our 5K is largely attended by family members of deceased organ donors and their friends, and it's an opportunity for people to come out and celebrate their life. So without that, there's some things we're missing out on in sharing. So we're looking forward to restarting that.
Yeah, I can see. I can see that you're excited about, even if it's 2022. You're already there in your head. You're waiting for it. So okay, Elisse, I've got a couple, just 3 questions that I end everything with. They're relatively short, kind of categorization questions to wrap this up. The first one is the hardest, as I've discovered, for people over dozens of these interviews in the last few months. So feel free to take your time, pause, think about it. Any extended awkward pauses I'll cut out of the podcast or the video. So feel free to take a second. First question, how would you describe your 2020, your year of the pivot? How would you describe 2020 in one word?
Well, the first word that came to my mind was life-changing.
I'll call that one word. We'll give you that. We'll give you a hyphen in the middle of that. Life-changing, one word. Okay, I'll buy that. That's a good one. What characteristics or personality traits of yours would you say were crucial to your survival, let alone your success this year, in terms of in the capacity of the work that you do? Which of your personality traits were crucial to your survival and success?
I think first and foremost, I am a very positive person. I always have a positive outlook. On any personality test, I score through the roof on positive, those types of categories. And so I think that really helped, kind of always, trying to look at the positives of things. Now, that being said, I'm very well aware of the tragedies that have happened over the past year, and I am not in any way oblivious to it, and I periodically feel a little guilty when I think of the quote unquote positives that have come out of the world slowing down. But that is for sure what got me through both personally and at work. I mean, we had to maintain the positive outlook for our fundraising events and maintain kind of that forward thinking, like this is, we're going to be able to do it. Where there's a will, there's a way kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So funny, as you were describing the positivity showing up, I was just imagining you taking one of those Facebook quizzes and it just giving you a bright yellow sun as the result. Don't take those quizzes; they steal your information. Anyway,
yeah.
I had a cybersecurity expert on the podcast last season, so just a PSA.
Yeah,
I'll cut that out of this interview. So okay, last question. And actually, before I do the last question, where do you want people to go find you? Do you want people to connect with you as you across LinkedIn, socials? Do you want them to find the foundation, the network, both? Let me know anything, anywhere you want people to find you across, anywhere.
Okay, we would love people to go to our Facebook page, which is NJ Sharing Network. And we have a Twitter account at NJ Sharing. We are on Instagram. We are on Snapchat. We are on LinkedIn. We're on all of those platforms. So yes, people definitely should reach out to us. And of course, we have our website, njsharingnetwork.org.
Okay, lastly, what at this point, January 2021, what is your outlook on the future of your business, the New Jersey Sharing Foundation, or your particular arm of it, the philanthropic end? What is your outlook on the future of your business at this point?
Well, given my answer to my last question, my outlook's very positive.
Of course it is.
We had a very strong 2020 from an organ procurement perspective, and I see that, that's continuing. You can see our clinical teams are completely geared up, analyzing data and ensuring that we will continue to recover organs and get organs to those who need them. From our foundation perspective, again, I'm feeling very positive. Our community is reaching out to us via social media. They're calling us, they're emailing us, kind of people are they're ready to go. And I'm looking forward to the cold weather passing by, warmer weather coming, and having the opportunity to hold some kind of gatherings, in person, outdoor, in a greater space, and seeing our community again. We do know that they're very supportive. We are seeing donations, contributions on the rise again. More people reaching out to us to make contributions, more sponsors getting back involved with us. So I'm feeling very good about getting back on track this year.
Listen, Elisse, I really, really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are, and I really appreciate your patience as we had little technical problems getting started, little delay at the beginning of this, as is the world we now live in. So thank you for your patience with working that out, and I'm just so excited to continue watching, from afar, the journey of the foundation and how you guys just keep doing awesome stuff, and I hope to stay in touch with you and your journey as well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.